Hello, my name is Ramirez and I am an 8th grade student at Yeager Middle School. My project title is Cake Batter Resting. Now let me walk you through my experiment. My introduction. What would happen to the cake if I let the cake batter rest differently before it bakes? My science fair topic is to find out what would happen if the same cake batters rest differently. I have to test the rise of the cake batters after they finish baking. If I bake a cake that has rested at room temperature, then it will rise more than the other cakes because the cake batter had time to rest at room temperature. I plan to conduct my experiment by making the cake batter first. Next, I evenly distributed the cake batter into 3 6-inch pans. Then, I let one rest in the refrigerator for an hour, one rest at room temperature for an hour, and baked one immediately. The cakes baked for 30 minutes in a preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. When all the cakes finished baking, I compared the rise of the cakes. My topic is important because people bake cakes all over the world. For example, someone has just finished making the batter of a cake and needs to leave the batter to go do something else. Should they go ahead and put it in the oven, or should they wait until he or she returns? This experiment will help the baker make a decision. Another reason this experiment is important is to inform the bakers out there whether they will get a rounded cake or a flat cake when letting their cake batter rest differently. In sum, this topic is important for people who are new at baking. Now for my research. First, I researched a vanilla cake recipe for my experiment. I found a recipe on Preppy Kitchen created by John Cano on August 29, 2019. Next, I researched mistakes bakers make and how to fix the mistakes. Julie Donald's cake not rising. You might be making one of these common mistakes. Inform me about different factors that affect the rise of cakes. Paul Hollywood's fixing mistakes. Let me know how to fix uneven shaped, cracked, and tight cakes. Jennifer Ann's 15 mistakes everyone makes when baking a cake. Notify me on mistakes I could possibly make when doing my experiment. Then I looked up different mixers for baking and cake tips. Sarah's hand mixer versus stand mixer, when to use one over the other, helped me decide what to use for my experiment. I used an electric stand mixer for my cake batter because it was easier to use. It was easier because I wouldn't have to hold the bowl and mix it myself. Matt Armandariz's Cake Tips and Techniques is a guide that gave a lot of information about baking. For example, how to accurately measure ingredients, cooling cakes, storing cakes, and lining a cake pan. Overall, the information in these websites are really helpful and should be read thoroughly. My hypothesis. If I bake a cake that has rested at room temperature, then it will rise more than the other cakes because the cake batter had time to rest at room temperature. Now the materials. I use 5 cups of organic all-purpose flour, 3 cups of granulated sugar, 3/4 a teaspoon of baking soda, 4½ a teaspoon of baking powder, 1½ a teaspoon of salt, 2½ cups of unsalted butter, 9 egg whites, 3 tablespoons of vanilla extract, 1½ a cup of sour cream, 1½ a cup of whole milk, 1 electric stand mixer, 3 6-inch cake pans, 4 bowls, 1 large bowl, 4 small bowls, 1 plate, 1 whisk, 1 spatula, 1/4 a teaspoon, 1/2 a teaspoon, 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon, 1 cup, 1/2 a cup, 1/4 a cup, 1/3 a cup, and 1 stainless steel platform lead kitchen scale. Now for my procedures. First, I gathered all my materials and ingredients. Then I buttered and floured the cake pans. After that, I pre-measured all the ingredients and put each into a separate bowl, plate, or cup. Then I preheated the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Afterwards, in a large bowl, I mixed the salt, sugar, flour, baking powder, and baking soda. Then, in a different bowl, using the stand mixer, I mixed the vanilla, butter, egg whites, sour cream, and milk. Then I mixed the wet and dry ingredients together. I was careful not to overmix the batter because if I did that, then my cake wouldn't rise and be dense. Then using a scale, I evenly distributed the batter into 3 6-inch cake pans. After that, I took 1 cake pan and put it in the oven for 30 minutes. For the other 2 cake pans, I covered them in plastic wrap. Then I put one in the refrigerator for an hour, and I put one at room temperature for an hour. Later, when the first cake was done baking, I measured how far the middle of the cake was from the top of the pan. Then, when the 1 hour timer was done, I baked the 2 other cakes for 30 minutes. After the 30 minutes was up, I measured the last 2 cakes. Then I took pictures of the results, recorded data, wrote in the journal, and cleaned up. Finally, I repeated steps 1 through 16 2 more times to get all 3 trials. Now my problems and solutions. I encountered 3 problems during my experiment. I did not let the butter set to room temperature, so this may have affected the rise of the cakes. I did not do anything to fix this problem because I knew if I kept on mixing the batter, then the cake would not rise and it would become dense. Another problem I encountered was my brother breaking the glass bowl that contained the baking soda. I simply solved this problem by grabbing a plastic container and filling it up with 1/4 a teaspoon of baking soda to replace the broken one. The third problem I had was breaking the egg yolk while pre-measuring the ingredients. As a result, some egg yolk got into the egg whites. To solve this problem, I grabbed a different bowl and more eggs and started separating the egg yolk and the egg whites again. These are my problems and how I did my best to fix them. Now for my variables. There are 3 types of variables: dependent, controlled, and independent. My dependent variable is the height of the cake. My controlled variable is the amount of ingredients. The independent variable is the resting cake batter at room temperature for an hour, the resting cake batter in the refrigerator for an hour, and baking the cake immediately. Now for my results. The heights of the cake were really close. The cake batter I baked immediately rose 7/8 of an inch the first trial, 15/16 of an inch the second trial, and 1 inch the third trial. The cake that rested at room temperature for an hour rose 1 inch the first trial, 1 inch the second trial, and 15/16 of an inch the third trial. The cake that rested in the refrigerator rose 1 inch the first trial, 15/16 of an inch the second trial, and 1 inch the third trial. Overall, the cakes that rested for an hour covered in plastic wrap rose higher. Right here I have the 3 graphs all portraying the same data. And right here I have the cakes from trial 1, trial 2, and trial 3. And they're all in order, from baked immediately, rested at room temperature, and in the refrigerator. In conclusion, the room temperature cake and the cold cake rose the highest. My hypothesis was that the cake batter resting at room temperature would rise higher. I based my hypothesis on all the times I have seen bakers put things to rest at room temperature in baking shows. The cake baked immediately rose an average of 15/16 of an inch. However, the other cake batters that rested rose an average of 47/48 of an inch. Overall, the cake batters that rested rose the highest when baked. Because of this result, I wonder if putting plastic wrap over the resting cakes, choosing one specific recipe, and not waiting for the butter to reach room temperature majorly affected the results. Also, based on how close the results are, I personally think that leaving the cake batter out doesn't make a difference in the rise. Overall, I learned many things during this project that I did not know before. Now for some questions that you might possibly have. First question: why are you interested in the scientific question? My answer: I was interested in this experiment because sometimes when I bake a cake, I forget to preheat the oven and I have to wait for the oven to reach the temperature it needs to be. The next question: what steps were taken in designing the experiment? The steps for my experiment mostly came from Prepper Kitchen. This is the website where I got my vanilla cake recipe. I chose this recipe because the instructions said to split the batter into 3 cake pans, and that is exactly what I needed. And now for the third and final question: how are the results collected? I collected the results by measuring how far away the batter was from the top of the cake pan. The batter was always 1 1/4 away from the top. So I took away how far the cake was from the top of the pan after it finished baking from 1 1/4 an inch to get my results. Thank you for your time.